Ben ritrovati gentili telespettatori, queste sono nuove puntate di 724 Europa, questa è la solita postazione del nostro programma, del programma che seguite, vi ringraziamo con tanta passione qui all'interno del Parlamento europeo, del Vox Box, è una posizione davvero molto speciale. Così come speciale è il nostro protagonista, ve lo presenterò fra poco, dovrò fare una specie di cambio perché adesso, come sapete, parlo evidentemente in italiano, adesso fra poco parlerò in inglese perché il nostro ospite parla in inglese e perché è una personalità di tutto rispetto. So, I explain in Italian to the audience the opportunity to welcome Colin Willcock. Welcome on board and welcome in our program. You are the chairman of the board of the 5G Infrastructure Association, that is?
Yes, that is correct. Should I clarify what that is, maybe, for the users?
Yes, just to explain, for example, the 5G IA and the 5G PPP.
Yes, so the two are related. So the 5G Infrastructure Association tries to be the voice of European industry for 5G matters.
Private.
Sorry?
Private. Private sector.
The private sector, but it's not just big industry that we represent. So it's not just the Nokias and the Ericssons of this world. We also have the operators on board, but critically we also have the SMEs and also the academic and the research institute. So we've got a sort of membership right through the industry. So it enables us to take a position or develop a position which actually is representative of European industry as a whole. Which
but
is
just for recommendation to the European Commission for the spectrum.
For spectrum, which we have done. We have a spectrum working group that has done that. So that's the key thing, the 5G.
Why not the big company? There is a reason about this?
No, the big companies are there.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Sorry, it's not that the big companies are not there.
Okay.
The big companies are there, but in addition to that, we have the SMEs. So we have the whole spectrum.
It's not only a big company.
No, it's not only big companies. And that's important because obviously big companies have a certain view, but equally we need to, in Europe, develop an innovative infrastructure which also supports SMEs and the next generation of Facebook and Google and all these others. And that's typically not necessarily the big companies. So we need a 5G environment which is good for the whole of European industry and research.
We never forget, we discussed to the audience, so it's quite, B2C. It's not B2B. So we need to use just simple words to explain, for example, 5G, because now 5G is quite marketing, as you know, by the telco. But what is in reality 5G, Colin Willcock?
That's a very difficult question.
Not really.
Well, it isn't so much as it's been a buzzword. The full promise of 5G is something radical. So the full promise of 5G will change every single person's life. It will actually change the whole basis of how we do business. It will digitize most industries, and it will also change our lives in terms of the fact that our lives will become digitized and connected. That's the promise of full 5G. That's not something we have today.
It could be beyond the mobile?
Very much beyond the mobile. The mobile is, shall we say, just one aspect which, to be honest, one can do to a certain extent with the current technology, with LTE. So if we're just talking about smartphones, then perhaps we don't even need a new standard. So at the moment, 5G will do that part better, that massive broadband, and that's super for if you've got teenagers or like good service yourself.
Yes.
But that's not the promise of 5G. 5G should go well beyond that. And what it will do, what it can potentially do, is it can link all these systems and networks together. So if you can imagine a city or a so-called smart city where everything is connected digitally, so that means the water, the electricity, the transport, the healthcare, the media. So instead of being completely separate silos, these things are in some ways using the 5G as a sort of glue to link all of these services together, to digitize them, but also to coordinate them so that we can have a better quality of life, but also be much more sparing on resources, whether that be energy or being more green friendly or all the other things. We can optimize these things, and that's the big promise.
Trying to find a new claim for this. What is? Try to build a new future trying to thinking diversity in terms of business model, for example.
Yes.
Trying to find a claim, because I think that it's not a change only in technology. Even
You're
as you
exactly
know, we
right,
will
sir.
discuss about the verticals.
Yeah, so when we're talking about verticals, the telecoms industries has concentrated on the model you were talking about, which is where you have an end user with a smartphone, you have typically a big operator or set of operators which have dedicated spectrum, and then you have big vendors, Nokia or Ericsson, that then provide the network infrastructure for that operator. So that's the classic business model.
Yes.
And that's fine as far as it goes. But with 5G, we want to go beyond that existing business model, and we wish to actually address other markets, other industries, like automotive, like healthcare, like media, like smart cities.
Like
and
Internet of Things.
like Internet of Things, yes.
Okay.
These are all areas where 5G has the ability to actually provide huge advantage to these areas, and actually then we can have an ecosystem which isn't just pure telecoms and smartphones, but is all of these vertical industries together in one system. And that is very powerful. And firstly, it means that if we wish to be competitive in the future, then we need this all-encompassing full 5G for our industry to be competitive, which is one of the most important things. And if we can do that, if we can go there, it enables things which we cannot do today. But, as you rightly say, we will need to change that business model.
Yes.
Let's take an example. Let's take an example that the good people in this building or in the Commission say, 2025, no one will die on European roads. Now, it sounds like a dream, but it's technically possible. It can be done. 5G technology would allow you to do that.
Okay.
But who's going to pay for it? Because to do that, what you would need is network all along all the roads.
Who pay?
Exactly, this is the question. and the problem is for an operator.
Because for the license, for example, in Italy, the telco pay a lot.
Yeah, let me bring that into the equation, because
okay.
it is actually very valid.
Yeah.
But who will pay for these societal things? This is the question. And
So?
I'll come to the answer in a minute. But the point is, for the operators themselves, obviously having no one die in Europe, where's the commercial advantage? A few subscribers doesn't make it worthwhile. So we have to go beyond that business model, and if it's a societal issue, then it really means we need to bring in the aspect of government. We need to somehow get some funding model where the governments or the Commission can invest into these major missions and goals. It's the only way we can make it happen. But then how can we get that working together? How can we have private, commercial, and public money? And that is something we are working on. There are discussions, but this is something we need to work on. That's the tricky thing, the new business models, certainly.
So, from my notes, I remember that the European Commission are looking to have a commercial use in 2020, right?
That is correct, yes.
So it's a very great challenge.
It is a very great challenge.
It's not easy to achieve.
No, it isn't. Maybe I can say a few words to that, because there is many
Obviously,
places.
we hope that it could be possible, but it's not easy.
Sure. The issue here is, as I said, at the moment, everything is purely commercial. So the rollout of 5G is purely commercial. And unfortunately, the situations in Europe at the moment are not very conducive to rolling out 5G. And the key point here is that most of the operators spend an awful lot of money for the licenses for 4G, for LTE, and they still have capacity in their LTE network. In other words, they can handle the requirements of today with the existing networks. Now, at some point, they will run out of capacity and have to go to 5G, but it's not necessarily today. Whereas in other parts in the world, if you look at Korea, if you look at China to some extent, they have to do something. There is so much new demand, they have to do something. So we're a slightly different commercial situation, and that is one of the reasons why a broad rollout in 2020 in Europe is extremely challenging, shall we say.
Yes,
though,
sure.
to be fair, the European Commission is talking about stepwise deployment and having first deployments in each country in 2020 and complete coverage by 2025. So there is some chance of doing that. But you are right, it's a challenge. And coming back to your earlier point about the charge for licenses for 5G, obviously that is also something which needs some consideration, because these commercial organizations, the operators and things, only have one set of money. And if you ask them to pay billions for the license, then those billions, clearly they cannot then invest in the network. And if we're saying a lot of the potential of 5G is having a very broad, very dense network, then to some extent we are hurting ourselves by charging too much for those licenses. In many ways, what we've seen in some countries, I think countries like France, where they've said, well, we'll try, or Finland, where they've tried to keep the cost of the licenses lower, and then put constraints on that, saying certain coverage and things need to be provided. Then at least you're not trying to push things at both ends. More money for the license, and you need to give more money for the network at the same time, which is probably not going to work.
Yes, probably is not an advantage for the telco to invest. This is
exactly.
This is the point.
Exactly.
It's just a problem of industrial policy. A very serious question, Mr. Willcock. Is Europe ready for the 5G? Ready in sense, not the European Commission, not the European Parliament, not the politician, in terms of as a continent, is ready for the 5G, in your opinion?
I think Europe is probably in a similar situation to a lot of the world, where I would say a certain deployment of 5G makes sense. But what we have to understand is the 5G we have today, so the 5G that has been standardized in places like 3GPP, which is the standard for 5G. This standard is focused very much on massive broadband. In other words, it is mainly there for the smartphones, or possibly for cable replacement for fixed access. So those are the things it's very good at. Now, the promise of 5G, the things I've been saying, this will be wonderful, we can change society, they need more than that. And that version of 5G is not yet available. So can Europe deploy now? Well, it could deploy something, but it wouldn't be full 5G. Full 5G is not available yet. Full 5G needs quite a lot of development. Rather like when a child is born, you probably shouldn't send it out to work. You need to train and teach it. There is some development in 5G technology as well, where the 5G technology will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years and hopefully then fulfill that full promise. And in some ways, a slightly later deployment where you have a more capable technology might be a better strategy. So for Europe, for me, the critical 5G strategy is let's be the first to deploy full 5G. Not 5G now, as in 5G where I can only use it with a smartphone. Full 5G that can live up to that potential. And that will take some years, and that means that's where our investment should be going. Our investment should be going on research and development and trials to develop full 5G for the verticals. So looking at massive IoT, looking at ultra reliable, ultra low latency. These are the things we should be focusing on.
In some way, and seriously, Europe is a couple of steps behind China and US.
Well, Europe is a couple of steps behind. Well, not again, it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for deployment of the current 5G, then yes. But as I said, the current 5G will only take you so far. It's very limited. Or shall we say, it's limited to a particular use case. It doesn't enable the things we want. Therefore, in some ways, if they do massive deployment for marketing reasons now, they could end up with a situation where they have a broad network of 5G, but that only does a very small part of what 5G enables, and they have to then go and change the network. And then who's going to be in the lead?
So, new advantage, for example, for automotive. You are in a highway, and with the car that have a self control in some way, and the 5G helps to know beat another car, or to be involved in an accident, or health. Because I heard, for example, in US, there is surgery or something like that that used 5G at this moment, try to exploit
Yeah, this is one of the classic use cases. Is remote operations. There have been demonstrations in Europe and demonstrations in the US. I don't think anyone's taken it live as yet, but yes, and there clearly what's vital is the amount of data and the latency. Obviously, if you or your family is being operated remote by a surgeon, you want to be pretty damn sure he can stop when he wishes to stop.
And even for our sector, because media is involved in 5G, it could be VR, for example, or immersive video. It could be.
Exactly right. That comes down in terms of VR, it's bandwidth, which 5G has already. If you want tactile feedback, so you want to be able to feel things, then the latency has to be incredibly fast.
Yes.
And there you would need ultra low latency 5G. That is something which is being worked on now. That's not available yet.
But in my opinion, it could be interesting to evaluate another frontier that is open with 5G, the role of the smart city. Because, for example, there is two, I see your...
we were both at the Smart Cities Expos last week in Barcelona, so this is fine.
Barcelona, or even Bristol, or even Berlin, or even Rome, for example.
Sure.
Neutral host is a magic word.
It's a magic word.
For the 5G. Is this the challenge?
It's certainly a challenge. It comes back to business models to some extent, but obviously the situation is if you're in a situation where it is very expensive to roll out a network, then the business model we have today, which is that typically each individual operator in a country will have their own network. So you will have the Vodafone, you will have the Deutsche Telekom, you will have and they have their completely separate networks. Obviously, that's 3 times the cost. And if we want to be in a situation, for example, with automotive, that we have good coverage on every single road and motorway, then the cost times 3 would be impossible. So the ability, the promise of neutral host is you have one set of hardware, and that hardware then can be used as a service where several operators can make use of that hardware. So this is why neutral host is quite important.
This is a really big revolution.
Yes.
For each smart city, because it depends on a new paradigm for the city in the future.
Yes, I mean, in a number of areas.
Never in the past they think about this kind of
there is, in actual fact, there's something called multi-fire, which is based on LTE, which does also have this neutral host. So it's not completely new, but it's never really been released in the real world yet. So,
last question.
Please.
To be competitive, the competition, it could be interesting. And you know, in Europe, the competition between, for example, Spain and France, or France against Germany, it could be very interesting. There is a nation, there is a project, there is a city that is in this moment with the demo or presentation is quite leader in Europe, or it's quite enough early to say that?
Well, I think it's quite early. I mean, there's a lot of interest here. You've mentioned some of the ones which are really pushing, you know, places like Bristol, for example, or Barcelona, or places like this. They have a lot of activities there, and they have sort of trial networks out there. And also, if you look beyond that, obviously there's some in Korea and places like that, which they did for the Olympics and things like that. So
this means demos.
That means more demos in terms of, although in Korea they covered the Olympics and they did provide streams. But I think the jury's out. There is an incredible amount of activity here. I'm amazed how many cities are getting involved and want to be smart cities. I mean, literally dozens and dozens, even in a single country. So it does seem one of the most active areas in terms of verticals. Of course, it's not a single vertical, really. It's a combination of different services and combining it together.
It could be, for example, waste management.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the most interesting use cases I've seen is actually involving the Hamburg Port Authority. And you might say, Port Authority, why is that interesting? It's interesting because they actually control a huge area of land in Hamburg. So they have hundreds of kilometers of roads and square kilometers of houses and all the sort of things that a city has on a bigger scale, they have on a slightly smaller scale, in addition to all the logistics of thousands of containers and ships. And they are looking to use 5G to try and tie all this together and try and do that. And that's a very interesting real-world example, which might be a good smaller example of what smart networks can achieve or shall we say, smart cities can achieve.
And it will be quite interesting even to take a note even about the blockchain and the artificial intelligence on the separate sides, and to be a combination, an integration about this kind of resources.
Exactly right. And as we look to the future, these are the things. So whether we're talking about still 5G or beyond 5G, I don't care. But if you look at where networks or communication networks are going, and this is why we are lobbying to make sure this is part of the new Horizons Europe, the FP9 proposal, where because Europe is in such a strong position in network communications in terms of research and in terms of development and manufacture, with Ericsson and Nokia based in Europe, this is something we want to keep leadership of. And the key things we need to add are indeed IoT and intelligence. Those are the two things we need to somehow integrate into the existing or the future communication networks.
Thank you so much for your participation in this program, just to explain about the 5G. So my claim now is long life to 5G and to the Europe. And we are expecting for more results in terms of efficiency, latency, competition, industrial policy, and go on. So good luck for your very interesting challenge in terms of to be ambassador for the 5G as a chairman of the board of 5G Infrastructure Association. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
To join the program, and good job. E grazie ai nostri telespettatori che hanno sicuramente apprezzato questo programma per capire meglio le nuove tecnologie. Lo sappiamo, ci sono dei termini che non sono evidentemente molto semplici, ma siamo anche qui per accompagnarvi e spiegarvi meglio quali sono le prossime rivoluzioni, che poi le condividiamo insieme. Grazie per aver seguito 724 Europa, alla prossima puntata.